Good morning. For those of you who tune in on Thursdays, you know that on Thursdays we do our live stream on Plant of the Week. And this week I'm going to be talking about dwarf plumerias. I'm Steve at Rogers Gardens, and we've just gotten in this wonderful supply of these new dwarf plumerias. For those of you who aren't familiar with plumerias, they are actually a tropical tree native to Mexico, down through Central America and northern South America. And they do very well in warm climates. In Southern California, we can grow these outside all year. Other areas are probably South Florida and South Texas. Wherever you get a frost or a freeze, you have to really protect them. They are very sensitive to cold weather. But they're almost a mainstay in Southern California in the landscape, and people grow. I've been growing them for years. In fact, when I grew up in New York, I actually grew them outside in the summertime and brought them in for the winter time. I always loved the scent of them. I first saw them in Hawaii, where they use them as lay flowers. But boy, coming to Southern California, I found out they do very well outside here. A lot of people use them in the landscape. Most the standard size plumerias actually get pretty large. They actually can be small trees of 20-25 feet tall. You can grow these in containers. I have quite a few at home, these standard size ones. The problem is with the standard size plumerias is that they do get large over time. You can grow them in the ground also. My neighbor has some on the side of their house, and boy, they're up taller than the roof. They're probably about 20 feet tall. But the nice thing about these dwarf ones, these have just really hit the market. In the last few years, they really just become known. Is that the nice thing about these is that these stay very small. They have a slow rate of growth, and they can be kept in containers for years. I have one I got 2 years ago. I first saw them here at Rogers Gardens. We had them, I think that was the first time we brought in the dwarf ones. They're also called miniature, but if you look at the tag. But even after 2 years, it really hasn't grown all that much. The nice thing about these, even though the plants are small, the flowers are as large as the standard size ones. They do have, you can get large clusters of flowers. In fact, the one I got last year, the bright, sort of a rosy pink flower, starting in midsummer, and I had great big clusters like that of flowers, even on a very compact plant. Most of these are also fragrant too, another benefit. But like I say, the advantage of these small ones is that you can grow them in containers, and you can put them on your patio table in the backyard and enjoy them there close up. They really aren't all that difficult to grow. They're just some key things you have to look for. These are, in fact, this one is a miniature. These are just starting to leaf out now. These do go dormant in the wintertime. Even in Southern California, even in warmer climates, they will lose their leaves and go dormant. But usually about, once the weather starts warming up, the days consistently get 70, 75 degrees, they start leafing out and flowering. In fact, this one even has a first flowers starting here. These will probably be in bloom, these flower buds here. Probably in 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see the first flowers opening at this point. Yeah, there's another bud cluster here, so they do bloom when they're quite small. This is growing in an 8-inch pot. Even after 2 years, I still have mine growing in an 8-inch pot. But what I like to do is actually transplant them into a different pot. These are in plastic pots right here, and they'll grow fine in here. But one problem can be that the plastic pots are so light that once these get big, you get quite a bit of weight to these. These stems are very fleshy, and there's a lot of water in them. So when they start growing out, they can get kind of top heavy in the wind. So I like to put mine in terracotta pots. I use terracotta pots at home. They have more weight to them, so it actually stabilizes a little bit better. If you want to, you can also use all kinds of decorative containers. Here's a nice glazed green pot that's very attractive. Put that down there. Another terracotta pot that's a little bit more decorative. So if you really want to put this, display this on your back patio or on your patio table, you might want to choose a more decorative pot. It really doesn't matter. They're not all that fussy. But I like to transfer mine into a larger pot. You can do this at any time of year. If you're not disturbing the root ball, you can just sort of knock this out of the pot if you want, although this will grow perfectly fine in here for several years. this size here, this 8-inch pot. But if you do want to transfer it, you can just be very careful. I'm not going to do this, but you can actually tip this pot over and knock this out very gently, and just put it right back down in the new pot and add some soil around it. One key thing is that they do like a well-drained soil. So if you're growing in containers or even in the ground, you want to make sure your soil is well drained, especially during the winter months when they are dormant. A lot of people recommend using a cactus mix. Any bag cactus mix can be used. I find this to be a little bit too well drained. Cactus mix is just a potting soil with extra sand and grit and pumice, just to make it much better at draining. Personally, if you're growing in a small pot, especially like in a terracotta pot, which can lose water, can evaporate through the surface here, I actually like to mix my soil. I use about a half cactus mix with half regular potting soil, and that seems to work fine for me. If you're doing it in a very large pot, you could use all cactus mix. Some people have very good luck with this. But the problem is in the summertime, when these are all leafed out and hot days, these actually take quite a bit of water. And I have some large Plumerias and large pots like that at home. And I find out during the hot summer months, I may have to water these every day. And this is even with the cactus mix mixed with the potting soil. But if you're growing in all cactus mix on a hot day, you really have to watch the watering. The advantage of using this, maybe all cactus mix, would be in the winter when they are dormant. When they are dormant, they've lost all their leaves, they really don't take a lot of water. In fact, they want to be on the dry side. So that's one key thing to remember. And if you're planting these out in the ground, you want to make sure that they're not in a spot where the soil stays very wet. If we do have winter rains, or if you're in like South Florida or South Texas, where you can get rainfall all year long, you just want to make sure that soil is very well drained. If it's not, if water starts puddling, or if it's a heavy clay soil and it stays really wet during the winter when they're dormant, you can get a lot of rot. You can get root rot. So just make sure, whether you grow them in pots or in the ground, that your soil is well drained. They do like full sun, preferably. Sun and heat is the key thing. So at least 6 hours of sun per day. Full sun is preferable. I grow mine on the south side of my house, and they're very happy there. Even though it can get almost blistering hot in the summertime, we can get well over 100 degrees. They don't seem to mind it at all. As far as fertilizer goes, there again a few key things to remember. We've got a little noise in the background. Sorry about that. We have some construction going on in our parking lot. But they like a low nitrogen fertilizer, and one that's good. This is Seagrow's fertilizer. It's a water soluble one, about a tablespoon per gallon, but it's 4-26-26. So 4 indicates nitrogen, so it's low in nitrogen. The middle number 26 is phosphorus. That's the key thing to making the key element to make them bloom. So you want to make sure that you don't have a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. They'll grow, you'll have nice lush plants, but you'll probably get very few flowers. What I sometimes do, this is so low in nitrogen, I'll occasionally actually mix this low one with an all-purpose one. This is a 16-16-16. I probably wouldn't use this by itself, but sometimes, I'll alternate. I'll sometimes just use this when I'm fertilizing, and I probably do it about every 3 weeks during the summer months. I have a watering can, just a tablespoon per gallon of water, and I may alternate with maybe about every 3rd or 4th watering. I may just use the all-purpose one, especially if these leaves start getting a little bit yellow. Sometimes I'll actually do half and half. I have a 2-gallon watering can, so I'll do a tablespoon of this bud and bloom booster and a tablespoon of the all-purpose. So that gives you a little more nitrogen, but it still gives you a high phosphorus level, which is important. During the winter months, when they're dormant, don't worry about it at all. In fact, in the winter, if we do get some rainfall, I don't even bother watering mine. You don't want the soil to get completely dry, but if you have a long spell, several weeks without rainfall, you may want to give it a quick shot of water. In the ground, it's usually not as important. But again, if it gets extremely dry, you just want to make sure that they get regular water. Especially in the summertime, just a little bit in the wintertime, just so that soil is barely moist. Insect problems are really Fortunately, there aren't a lot of things that bother Plumeria. I've never had really had to deal with any insect problems. Aphids don't seem to bother them, which is a common one on a lot of plants in the summertime. Occasionally there may be some mealybugs that get in there, usually easy to control, but there's not too much else that bothers these. These have if you break the leaf or the stem, you'll have a milky sap, so I think that may be somewhat of a deterrent to insects. They are fairly easy to propagate. Sometimes when these get too large, they'll outgrow the pot or they'll start getting too tall. And you can, at the beginning of the growing season, usually about April or May, before they've started leafing out, you can actually just cut one of these branches off. I let it air dry for about 3 days just so that cut end heals over. Then you can just, you can get a small container and just stick it in the container, keep it barely moist. And one way to tell that it's rooting is that if all of a sudden the leaves start to grow, that's a good indication that you've gotten some roots, but they're really not all that difficult if you really want to propagate these. Again, if I'm propagating, I probably would use all cactus mix because it does drain well. When they're trying to root, they really don't want to be kept very wet at all. And then once they start growing, you can increase the watering and then start fertilizing. I think that's about it for Plumerias. Do we have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Steve. Okay, how do you get new cutting to grow flowers?
Okay, question. How do you get cuttings to grow flowers? Again, it may take a year or two to get up to size, especially if you're taking a small cutting. But again, a lot of the key is in the fertilizer. You want to give them full sun, keep them growing well, but again, don't give them a lot of nitrogen. Nitrogen will just encourage leaves, vegetative growth at the expense of flowers. So either you probably just use this one of these fertilizers with low nitrogen. They're called bud and bloom boosters, and that's for a reason. Causes buds and flowers. So that would be the best way to do it. Full sun, low nitrogen fertilizer, and just be patient.
All right. What dirt do you use to transplant them?
Okay, the soil, as I mentioned, you can use, a lot of people use cactus mix, especially in larger pots. I like about half cactus mix and half regular potting soil. I just mix it together. These don't want to be over potted. This is an 8-inch pot. This can probably stay in here for 2 to 3 years, being a miniature or dwarf. So you don't want to put this into a huge pot. If you do, you can run into root rot problems because that soil mass is so large. This would be a good sized pot if you want to transplant for now, and as the plant gets bigger, move it up into a larger pot.
What about bone meal? Using bone meal for them?
Bone meal, yeah. Bone meal is high in phosphorus. You can add some bone meal to that. There's fish bone meal, there's regular bone meal. That certainly wouldn't hurt. That's going to give you a little extra phosphorus. I'd still go with an all-purpose fertilizer because the bone meal usually doesn't have, I think there's very little potassium in and usually very little nitrogen, which would be okay. But I'd supplement your fertilizer with the bone meal if you want to use that.
How often do they need to be fertilized?
Okay, how often they need to be fertilized? If they're growing in a container, if you're using a water-soluble one, I do mine about every 2 to 3 weeks during the summer, probably about every 3 weeks during the summer months. If they're in the ground, you may want to do it at the beginning of the growth season. You probably won't need to do it again.
Are these plants good for a sloped backyard?
I'm sorry, for a sloped?
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you can keep them watered, they'd be fine as long as your soil is prepared. The nice thing about a slope is that generally the soil is well drained. The water can drain down the slope, so that usually would be a good location.
And if it gets a lot of sun?
Yeah, they prefer full sun.
Okay.
Again, they're from the tropics. They grow best in full sun. Even in Southern California, it can get very hot. They're very happy in full sun.
How do you keep them from getting too tall?
Okay, how do you keep them from getting too tall? As I say, the miniatures, you don't have to worry about that usually, but if you do, if they're going to continue to grow every year, you can actually, it's usually done at the beginning of the growing season, right when they're coming out of dormancy, again, about April, May, at least in Southern California. You can actually cut these anywhere along the stem here if you want. If this, for instance, if this stem was really too high, you can just cut it back. You can root these cuttings, but where you cut it, it usually will send out 1 or 2 shoots from below the cut. So you can reduce the size, cut it back farther, you know, to get new growth from the bottom.
All right, oh wait, hold on. What is the best zones for these plants?
I'm sorry, the best stones?
Zones, like areas for these plants.
Oh, the best zones.
Yes.
Again, yeah, for zones, again, they're very frost sensitive. So anywhere in the country where it's frost free, which is usually limited to about Southern California, South Florida, South Texas. As I say, you can grow them in any parts of the country in containers. As I say, when I lived in New York and Pennsylvania, I actually had some quite large ones in containers, but I'd bring them inside before frost. Usually by that time, it usually got frost sometime in October, mid to late October. And by that time, usually the leaves are turning yellow and they're falling off, so they're going dormant. So you can actually bring them into the house or just a warm area. It doesn't, once they've lost their leaves, it doesn't even have to be in a sunny window, just as long as it's frost free. Okay.
Is it difficult to create a hybrid for different colors?
Well, that's a good question. They do breeding. I've never done it, but there is a lot of breeding going on. They do a lot of breeding in Hawaii. There's several places in Florida, Plumeria nurseries, and even in Southern California that do some breeding. I've never done it myself. I don't think it's all that difficult as long as you know how to do it.
So they don't need humidity?
They probably would prefer humidity, but even in Southern California, it's very dry in the summer. There's not a problem. Sometimes humidity can be a problem in itself. I've seen them on the Big Island of Hawaii around Hilo, where it's very wet in the summertime, very wet and humid, and they actually can get mildew problems on the leaves there. So you can have too much humidity sometimes, if it's too rainy and humid, you can get some leaf disease problems. So they seem to, even with a very low humidity in Southern California, they do well. Humid areas like South Florida, they seem to do well. They get a little more sun. Hilo can be very cloudy and damp and rainy, so that can be a problem.
Okay. What is the best method to grow seeds from the seed pod?
The best way to grow seeds? Just in a well-drained soil. The seeds germinate very easily. I did that years ago. The only problem with growing from seed is that they can take a long time to bloom. All these ones that you buy in nurseries, these are propagated by cuttings. They're cuttings that have been rooted. I mentioned about how to root them. So they bloom fairly quickly. Seeds can take, they can take 5, maybe even 10 years before you see the first flowers for some reason. That's true with a lot of plants, a lot of the fruit trees, it's the same way. From cuttings or grafting, they grow pretty quickly. From seeds, they just take a long time. But they are fairly easy. If you want to try it, I've done it myself. It's kind of fun to do.
All right. Do the Plumerias need misting at all?
I wouldn't really bother with misting if you're, even in our extremely hot, dry weather in the summertime here in California, I've never worried about misting them. I just make sure that there's enough water for the roots to take up the water. So the misting really, I don't think is all that important.
All right, that seems to be all the questions today. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, well, thank you. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And you can look at these videos. They'll be on YouTube. So you can look at archive videos from way back. And I think that's it. Thank you.